They showed up at dawn with a bulldozer and a smile like they owned the sun, parked the blade inches from my split-rail fence and announced loud and cheerful that they were reclaiming the buffer. They thought a work order and a couple of men in hard hats would be enough to erase a property line. They didn't know my drone watched them rip up my survey stakes in the middle of the night, and that was the moment everything flipped. I'm Daniel Clark. I make maps for a living, not the romantic kind, but the stubborn exact kind. Property lines, plats, surveyed pins with numbers and county records. I bought 4 acres of untamed woods for one reason: to be outside of Grandview Estate's manicured reach. On one side of my fence are 20-foot oaks, a creek that hums in spring, and a house that smells like coffee and old paper. On the other side are perfect lawns matching mailboxes and a homeowners association that thinks it's a small municipal government. Their president, Karen Foster white tracksuit, perfect hair, plastic smile, likes to call it community stewardship. I call it control. The first morning it was just noise. Diesel before birdsong. I opened the back door in jeans and boots, and there it was, a yellow machine and standing like a General Karen. "Morning, Mr. Clark," she said, arms folded as if she'd been invited in. "Lovely day for some community improvement." The operator leaned on the machine, bored. I pointed at the fence, the split rail that's been there longer than the HOA's newsletter. "You are on my property," I said. "Show me a court order." She laughed and waved a paper that looked important from a distance. "We have a permit," she announced, like someone reading from a script she'd written for herself. I called the sheriff. That part is boring and necessary dispatch, waiting the deputy's tired look when he realizes the whole neighborhood woke up for this. He read the paper, and then he looked at me and said, "The thing you always hope to hear in these fights. That's a work order from your HOA. It's not a court order. I can't let them tear down your fence." For the moment, they left engines sighing away. But Karen didn't walk away humbly. She pivoted to paperwork warfare. Over the next few weeks, my mailbox filled with cream envelopes stamped with the Grandview crest. Citations for unapproved exterior flora. A fine for visual pollution accompanied by a grainy zoom on a ceramic gnome. By our bird bath. The gnome's name is Bartholomew, by the way, and this was a war on whimsy. Each letter said the same thing in different fonts. You are non-compliant. Pay or take it to court. It's a slow, bureaucratic bleed. It works on people who don't fight back. I won't lie, there were nights I wondered if they'd be right. I have a wife, Emma, who likes order but despises bullies, and there was a sliver of me that thought maybe we buy ourselves some calm. Maybe we sell, pick the smaller battle. That was the low point, the one where I lay awake and pictured moving signs and empty woods and my map-lined office going quiet. It was tempting because the obvious thing in front of me was a community that could make things miserable cheaply and persistently. But Emma looked at me and said quietly, "You didn't draw lines for your job, and then give them up when someone frowns." That sounded corny in the moment, but it steadied me. I remembered why lines matter. So I started fighting wit. Not with shouts, but with evidence and a touch of petty genius. I made a ridiculous official permit to mind your own business. Laminated it, zip-tied it to the fence, and stuck a tiny QR code in the corner that popped up a county plat with a blinking blue dot labeled "Not Your Land." A few neighbors scanned it from the clubhouse Wi-Fi just to be polite or to gossip. I logged 6 hits within an hour. I bought 24 neon survey flags and sprinkled them across the property at night in a smiley face pattern that drove the HOA surveyor to distraction for a morning. It was childish. It was delicious. And then I set a trap. I own a drone, a quiet custom quad with thermal and 4K night vision, the kind of toy that looks nerdy until you need it. One night at 2 a.m., I launched it and watched my property line in grayscale while Emma slept. For hours, nothing but deer and raccoons moved through the trees. Then, an unmarked van slid to a stop, 2 figures got out and walked straight to my metal survey stake. One of them produced a stake puller, and with the practiced cruelty of people who assume impunity, they pulled my iron pin free, tossed it aside, and hammered in a cheap wooden stake 30 feet inside my boundary. They repeated it 3 times. I froze the footage on a grainy, perfect frame that showed a face I'd seen before. Bill Harris, the landscaper Karen introduced at the HOA meeting as our contracted beautification expert. He was too casual in the frame gloves on, like he was reclaiming a piece of a map someone else had drawn. That drone footage changed everything. This wasn't passive aggressiveness. It was theft, deliberate, coordinated, and documented. Karen tried to spin the narrative. She posted to the neighborhood group about safety concerns and unnatural growth and called a special meeting at the clubhouse to vote emergency action on the buffer zone that happened to include my backyard. She wanted an audience. She wanted a mandate. Fine. She handed me a stage. The night of the meeting, I cleaned up, wore a shirt that wasn't a walking stain, and walked into the clubhouse when the room was already murmuring. Karen stood behind the lectern, practiced and perfumed. She pointed at me like a villain in a bad movie. "Here he is," she said, "Mr. Clark." I let her introduce the town villain, and then I stood up and said, "Calm as a man who's done his homework, I don't want to take much of your time. I have a short video." The projector guy hesitated. People like to avoid trouble, but he clicked play. The screen flickered into thermal black and white, and the room watched two shadows move across my edge in the dead of night. The stakes came up. New ones hammered in, the color footage zoomed on a familiar jawline. A woman in the back shouted, "That's Bill Harris." The murmur turned to a ripple. Karen's smile cracked. She did what cornered people do. She lied louder. "It's edited," she sputtered. "Fake." Her voice thinned with panic. And then she doubled down, bigger lies and inspector paperwork that would make the county blush. She announced the cleanup would happen Saturday, and this time she promised an inspector would be present. Saturday morning came with gray clouds and two ill-intentioned men, one with a trimmer, another with a chip on his shoulder. Bill stepped over the fence and shoved me. It wasn't a punch, but it was an escalation physical contact in front of witnesses. Emma's voice rang from the porch. I have that on video. She'd been recording the whole time. Bill's chest fell. The county inspector, Anna Morris, or so she said, flashed a badge too quickly. I'd learned not to be impressed with badges that move like magic. I called an old deputy who knew our street. He showed up and told them in no uncertain terms that what started civil had become criminal. The math of it changed when someone puts their hands on you and a camcorder captures it. We needed more than heat-of-night footage and a deputy's good timing. We needed a paper trail. A thumb drive appeared in my mailbox a few days later, no return address. It was Arthur Wright's work scanned invoices, checks, and email chain between Karen Bill and Inspector Anna arranging permits and payoffs. Arthur was the HOA treasurer, a man who signed dollars without thinking about the faces that collect them. He'd downloaded everything and left it for me on the kitchen counter. Whoever left the drive didn't speak, they just handed me the picture. Lawyer Michael Peterson called it a slam dunk when he saw the stack deed survey drone footage, emails, invoices. But he wanted one last move, get Anna on record. He told me to call the inspector on a recorded line with him listening. Anna's voice slithered through the phone with the practiced certainty of people who think they own the system. Peterson asked for a statute number for a docket authorizing emergency entry onto private land. Silence, paper rustling stammers. Anna hung up. Karen called within minutes, all clipped panic and shrieks. "What did you say to her?" she demanded, and in the tone of her voice I heard defeat. She'd just given us the final admission. She'd panicked, and in panic, people confess. The endgame arrived in the middle of the night when Karen went for brute force a flatbed truck and a bulldozer bigger than the first two security goons in cheap jackets that read private security. Motion sensors lit up my backyard like a runway. I called 911 and watched the truck roll into the street. The goons stepped forward like they had a right to intimidate. They didn't know the sheriff had my evidence or that the deputy I'd spoken to had called backup. Lights cut the dark. Two deputies moved first, then a sergeant with a calm that made panic seem small. He didn't theatrically wrestle anyone. He simply held up an evidence bag with the thumb drive inside and said very quietly, "We've been listening to calls. We have invoices. We have emails." He looked at Karen and without relish read the line that makes every empire wobble. "Karen Foster, you have the right to remain silent." The security guys were on the pavement in cuffs in less than a minute. The operator killed the bulldozer. It was over. The rest is paperwork and consequences. There's no gloating in the way you see in movies, no big scene of me standing with the community cheering. There was the dull, clinical satisfaction of the law doing the thing it's supposed to do. Fines, restitution. Anna losing her job and license, Bill and his goons facing charges. Karen banned from ever serving on an HOA board again. The county required ecological restoration of the creek bank that had been torn up. I was allowed to approve the contractor. The line on the map, the one that mattered, was honored. When the engines left and the floodlights turned off for good, I stood on my back deck and listened to the creek. It sounded the same as it always did, like a tiny, stubborn thing that doesn't much care who advertises itself as neighborhood queen. Proof in the end was stronger than power. Draw your line, learn its edges, and if someone tries to bulldoze it, record everything.